everybody. Happy Friday. Another huge game for Norwich City on the horizon. The long trip to Deepdale tomorrow afternoon. We're making the journey up pretty shortly, so we thought we'd come in quickly with a preview show. Adam Harvey joined by Connor Southwell. Connor, of course we want the guys' comments and questions, but I think the place to start is probably Liam Gibbs out for the season. Huge blow. We kind of expected it maybe when we saw him trudging down the tunnel there at Hillsborough on Tuesday night. Quad injury. Off to see a specialist to see whether there's any surgery required, but that is his season over. Just 4 starts, 22 appearances altogether. It feels like a season that's probably grown frustration for him generally, but this is probably now kind of just the icing on the cake of a sort of disappointing season.
Yeah, I didn't realise it was as low as 4 starts until you said it. But yeah, that's staggering, really, from a player who was young player of the season, got handed a 5-year deal last summer. It's been a tough season for him, and I'm sure if you spoke to him candidly and got him in a quiet moment, he would admit that it's clearly not gone the way that he would have liked after what was I think it's fair to say a breakthrough season last year. And it's obviously not easy. I think when you look at him and the position that he naturally wants to play, maybe not the position that he's played a whole host this season in central midfield, it's tough when you're trying to play in an area that has been dominated by players like Kenny McLean, Gabriel Sara, now obviously in recent weeks Marcelino Nunez. It makes life very difficult, I think, to try and break into that and to try and impose yourself on that. And we know Wagner doesn't play with a 6 in the traditional sense, in the same sort of way as maybe Dean Smith did, or even Daniel Farke did at points. So yeah, it's led to him becoming a little bit of a utility player, and in truth, he's probably not performed any of the roles that he's been given to the level that I think we saw in his first season. And there's reasons for that, because as a young player, you need consistency, and you need consistency of position more than anything else. And he's had obviously a few to adapt with. We saw him Tuesday night. Felt like last night. Tuesday night, come on as a number 9. We've seen him operate out wide. We've seen him operate really across anywhere in the attacking area. And yeah, it's all felt a little bit disjointed for him, hasn't it? And I think maybe for him, it gives him an opportunity to. Obviously, it's a major blow, and you have to get over that first. But I think hopefully once he's over that hurdle of it, he will view next season as a real opportunity to hit the ground running again. But I think what's clear, and Ben Napper, I'm sure, will be looking at this as well, is that he and Norwich cannot have another season really where he's kind of on the periphery. It's a position that Adam Eder got stuck in for far too long. He needs to be playing football, and if that's not going to be at Norwich City, then obviously they need to look at a loan elsewhere. So yeah, really frustrating season for him, and obviously we hope that that's not an injury that requires surgery, and he's fully back for pre-season, ready to go ahead of next season, wherever that may be in terms of Norwich City and their league status.
Another player who's a doubt for the trip to Deepdale, Josh Sargent, scored his 15th goal on Tuesday night. We know how key he is to this team. That's long spell. He wasn't in the squad from sort of the end of August there through till kind of the end of December. They looked at a lot worse side without him. He's kind of been pushed through this sort of pain barrier, this injury that he's still persisting with at the moment in terms of his ankle. It's more of a quad situation based on Tuesday night. But how sort of big a blow would that be for Norwich if he's not available tomorrow? Because particularly going to Preston, where you're going to face a team that's right up for this game, he's probably the sort of player you require.
Yeah, it's massive, isn't it? I think we've all seen, we don't need to speak about the difference of Norwich City with or without Josh Sargent. That's been pretty evident so far this season. I mean, I've seen a few people speculate about this on social media, but I remember turning to you in the first half and saying that he was moving, pardon the pun, but he was moving a little bit gingerly. And there seemed to be some sort of discomfort. I presumed that it was the ankle. And then I sort of saw him sort of point to it, or sort of rubbing his leg. It looked more like a hamstring sort of thing, but obviously it was a quad issue, a thigh issue. And yeah, it's a major concern because Norwich have been managing him anyway with this ankle issue. It feels like in the last 2 weeks he's turned a little bit of a corner. He's been able to train a lot more consistently than he has been, and follow the schedule perhaps as closely as he's been able to since he returned from injury. And the fact now that something else has popped up is a concern, I think, and it maybe shows that the minutes that he's been exposed to has been too much, and you can see that with load in players, particularly when perhaps they're not given a run up into kind of being thrust into the action. He was I know he came on as a sub against Millwall and Southampton, but then he was really thrust in it, and off you go, and playing sort of consistent 90 minutes as well. That's bound to catch up on a player. I spoke about this a little bit in my verdict as well, and I'm sure we'll come on to it. But when you aren't giving players who are, within your squad moments to come onto the pitch and impact games, then that makes life naturally more difficult. It's not a criticism; it's a fact. I think it does make, because let's say Sargent doesn't make it tomorrow, and Norwich do go with Van Hooijdonk, or they go with Canaries Championship. Well, there's two players there who haven't played in the last 4 games. They've both been unused substitutes. They've not got minutes for the under-21. So you're in a position then when you're throwing a player in cold, and that's a very difficult circumstance for a player to come in, particularly at the size of the season, the size of this game, to then go in and make an impact. So yeah, it's a huge worry. Hopefully hopefully we don't know. Hopefully he's been able to train today, and if so, that would pass him for being in the squad. But Norwich have to be so careful with how they manage him. And obviously the relief, I suppose, after this weekend is that they go into the final 3 weeks, which are all Saturday games and all kind of clean weeks, to use a David Wagnerism. There's no kind of midweek games and additional load onto that, so that should give everyone a little bit more time for recovery. But yeah, absolutely, they could do without Sargent at any point, but as you documented there, particularly before this game, I feel.
Yeah, I was going to mention him. You've mentioned him. A few people in the comments have mentioned him. Sydney Van Hooijdonk, Dan Mayhew going, bad news for Sarge. Love to see Van Hooijdonk given a chance. Knowing Wagner, he'll go defensive. Lewis as well on YouTube. I feel for Sydney Van Hooijdonk, he'll be chucked in on Saturday and struggle. Connor, how do you kind of see that situation? 113 minutes so far in a Norwich City shirt. For a man that I know David Wagner spoke about kind of building up his fitness, but 113 minutes at this stage, a couple of months in from his loan spell. 4 games out from the end of the season. Of course, hopefully there's some playoff games there. But given kind of the situation with Sargent, how do you think Norwich have managed this kind of loan deal? Do you think it's probably frustration from his part, given they had Adam Eder, and he was a man, I know he wanted to go out on loan, but he was given opportunities off the bench. Van Hooijdonk hasn't really had that. Do you feel for the lad a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I feel for him, and I'm sure there are some conversations within his inner sanctum about why what's happening is happening or has happened. And we don't get the luxury, I'm afraid, of watching training every day, so we don't know how he's performed. I do think on the minutes that he's been given, he's looked not. I'm trying to word this in the right way. I think he's looked a little bit off it, but that's, again, you have to caveat that with the fact that he's not had many minutes. So I think there's a inevitability to him looking slightly off it if he's not given the opportunities and the minutes to play. The issue for me fundamentally is he doesn't feel like a striker that's in the same mold as the ones that David Wagner wants to deploy his style of play. He's not someone who's particularly pacey, and you can see from his stats and his data, and I think we said it as soon as he signed, really, he's not going to be a player that goes and presses and harries defenders for you in the same way that Josh Sargent or even Ashley Barnes does to a lesser extent. He is a penalty box operator. That is what he is. And and to be fair, the bits that we've seen of him in and around the penalty area, they've been very limited. I'd have to see the data, but I can't even think of a shot that he's had in a Norwich City shirt, if I'm being honest. But the moment that stands out for me is that clarity in around the box to feed in. Was it Christian Fashnacht for that goal that he got the assist for? So there is clearly quality there. I think for me, it's probably a stylistic point. I'm not sure he's the type of striker that fits into that fits into his system. And if you look at it on the surface, what's he done really? He swapped one bench in Italy for one bench in the Championship, and that's very difficult. And again, you have to put it in context of, and I think this is where he would have a little bit of understanding, because could he have any argument right now that he should be starting ahead of Josh Sargent? No, of course he shouldn't, and probably not Ashley Barnes as well in the way that he's performed. But should he be coming on later in games? Absolutely. And I'm sure when he sat at Hillsborough and he's watching Liam Gibbs get thrown on ahead of him, and then latterly Christian Fashnacht 2 minutes later to replace him, I'm sure he's probably sat there wondering kind of what he's doing, really, because it's not been one that's worked out. And I think there's a bigger point to make about this, which is, of course, that there is a permanent option within that deal that Norwich City can activate. And of course, for them to do that, they need to get a little bit of a view on him. And as you say, 113 minutes, I think it was, is not long enough to assess a player, irrespective maybe of some of the judgments that people have made on him. So it's a really complex and difficult and interesting situation, because you've got a player there that has been recruited by Ben Napper that hasn't really been fancied by David Wagner. I think that's probably fair to say. And, as Wagner said yesterday, all he can do really is apply pressure in training and wait for his opportunity to come. But it's very difficult, particularly if Josh Sargent is fit tomorrow. But even if he isn't, could I see a situation where, Sidney van Hooijdonk has finished the season at Norwich and hasn't started a single game? Yeah, I probably can. And that it's hard, I think, on a human level, not to feel for the lad in those circumstances.
Yeah, on a more positive note, Jonathan Rowe or David Wagner didn't directly rule him out for tomorrow, but said he's more likely to be available for the Bristol City home game next weekend. I think there's been a lot of conversations around how he gets back into this team, a side that maybe before the injuries was sort of, a fairly good-looking starting 11, very settled, getting the results they required. How big a boost will it be when he is back, Connor? A man who had a really sort of, I suppose, a really impressive breakthrough kind of at the start of this campaign. Maybe sort of fluctuate a little bit in terms of performance levels around the October-November period. But, we know he's the man for the moments when, particularly in this kind of running and those playoff games where it might require that one moment, he's the special player to pull up, that moment. So how big a boost will that be when he's back?
Yeah, absolutely massive. And you've just took it right off the tip of my tongue there. You look at those playoff games. I mean, you can see it across the season, particularly that away game at Portman Road, big games. He is a player who, sometimes you can cower, but he broadens his shoulders. He wants that. He wants those big moments. He wants to be the headline grabber. He wants to score goals. He wants to win games and decide games and be the person that people's talking about. And I think that's a really, really good quality to have for any player. It's not an arrogance. There's a real self-assurance about him that I think is excellent, and is probably the reason why he's been able to do what he's done this season. And I've asked him on a few occasions this season, after some big games, when people are talking about him, when some big clubs have been linked to him, do you feel like you've hit top gear yet? And his answer has always been no. I don't even feel like I've started. So yeah, particularly given, I think, the nature that Norwich, if they do go into that top six, that top six race, if they do get into those playoffs, they are going to look to play, and it's not going to be a shock to anyone, they're going to look to play those games on very small margins, and you need good players, and you need players who can produce moments of individual quality. You need quality in set pieces, as we saw against Ipswich, to edge that and make sure that those tight margins fall into your favour. And so he's a massive player for that. And like you say, hopefully it's going to be managed right. And I think David Wagner, to be fair to him, throughout his time at Norwich, has maybe Sargent aside, but there was a necessity to that, I think. Always has taken time and managed with caution players who are coming back from injury, and done it in the right way, in accordance, obviously, with his performance stuff and whatnot. So I'm sure that will be the case with John Rowe as well, because, as you say, as much as it's about the here and now and the boost that it will give Norwich, it's also the fact that they might have, hopefully, 3 games beyond their campaign to prepare for as well. And those are the ones that I'm looking at and feeling like they're going to be absolutely massive for John Rowe. So the next few weeks, hopefully, should just be a window to getting him back and into the best place that he can be for those games if Norwich City get there.
Moving the attention forward to Preston, had a little bit of a strange season, similar to Norwich, a start to the campaign that saw them top of the table. They were absolutely flying, had a really dramatic dip before they came to Carrow Road. I remember Ryan Lowe being under pretty immense pressure from the fan base at that point. Maybe they felt that the time to change was sort of imminent. That didn't happen. He got the backing from the Preston ownership, a club that generally backed their managers for a long time, similarly to Norwich, really, and give them a lot of time to maybe put things right. They kind of reaped the benefits of that, I suppose, since kind of the start of the turn of the year. They've had a pretty good run of form. I know they had a couple of poor results before that big win against Huddersfield the other night. I think it was just 1 point from 2 games prior to that, a draw at Watford and a defeat against Birmingham. But huge victory during the week, keeps them right in the hunt. I know kind of you've said at times, Connor, that maybe you felt Preston would fall away. They certainly aren't falling away. So what have you made of them so far this season?
Yeah, they've surprised me, to be honest. Really surprised me, particularly given, and again, it's difficult when you don't watch teams every week and you maybe try and judge them on what you've seen over the course of the season. But they came to Carrow Road and they looked absolute streets between the division and like you said, between the sides, sorry. And obviously they came to Carrow Road with a certain game plan to do a certain job, and they did that. And so I did kind of expect them to fall away, particularly with some of the games that they've had in the run that you mentioned. I mean, I've got it in front of me now. It's 4 league defeats since January. Norwich have lost 3, so that's a very good, and obviously an FA Cup 3rd round defeat to Chelsea. But hey ho, Norwich lost to Liverpool. So yeah, it's incredibly impressive. But more impressive, I think, is the run they've got at Deepdale. 1 defeat in 8 at home, which came to Stoke, surprisingly enough, in March. But some of the teams they've beaten along the way, I mean, they beat Bristol City 2-0. They beat Ipswich. They beat Middlesbrough. They beat Coventry 3-0 at obviously Coventry Stadium. Okay, yes, they've beaten Plymouth and Rotherham and Huddersfield, but so too have Norwich in the runs that they've been on. And it's a remarkable run of form. I think it's 2 defeats in 12, which isn't too dissimilar to the run of form that Norwich City have been on. So all of that makes this really interesting context, I think, going into this game, because you've got 2 teams, and I'm sure we'll talk about how high the stakes are in a moment, but with such high stakes, who are in really, really good form by and large, and obviously differing experiences in the week. And Preston will hope that home form is there. But yeah, I've been really impressed with the job that Ryan Lowe has done to keep them in the conversation, because they've probably defied what I expected of them, and probably what a lot of other people expected as well, because you looked at it at one stage and it did feel like it was Hull, Coventry and Norwich. And I think now it's very difficult not to put, particularly if they can win, ideally on Saturday from their perspective. But even if they get a result, I don't think they can be discounted from the conversation at this stage. So it's a huge credit to Ryan Lowe, obviously on the budget that they're on, which would dwarf completely what Norwich and maybe even Coventry are operating on at this moment in time. It's a remarkable achievement to get them as close to the playoffs as what he has done. Obviously, it's Norwich's job to try and play the party poopers on Saturday and to try and diminish any chance that they've got of the top 6. But irrespective, I think now of how the final 5 games in their case go, I think it's very difficult not to look at Ryan Lowe and that football club and admire the season that they've had, like you said, even amid some turbulence in the autumn, similarly to Norwich, and certainly in around the new year as well.
Yeah, they often label games in the Championship at this sort of stage of the season when teams are playing for things as a 6-pointer. Maybe less so from a Norwich perspective, but certainly for Preston. I know Ryan Lowe's kind of came out in the media after their victory against Huddersfield. He referenced it as maybe the biggest game of his career there at Preston in terms of managerial. They got to give everything. It's needs must. He sort of referenced how good a side Norwich are, but it's, about sort of picking up 3 points with a game in hand. They could then leapfrog Norwich. It's all about the psychology we've often spoken about. And when you're the team that's in 6th, it's quite psychologically, you are the team that's then being hunted. It changes your mindset completely. But bigger game for Preston than Norwich on Saturday, Connor?
Probably more of a must-win for Preston, I think, than Norwich. I think for Norwich, it's probably a must-not-lose, but for Preston, it is a must-win. It's as simple as that, and you've mapped it out. If they can beat Norwich, they move to within 2 points of them, and they have a game in hand, albeit that's away to Southampton. But they've been faltering a little bit of late, and away to Southampton as well, and follows actually on the Tuesday night after this game. So that would give them a huge amount of momentum and belief heading into that clash if they could do it. And obviously, if Norwich draw the game, then it retains that 5-point cushion, but that would then probably allow other teams to capitalise. And, and as we've seen, the Championship, even this week alone, the Championship has thrown up ridiculous results and continues to do so. But, Coventry are at Birmingham, it would open the door and probably reopen the door for some of the teams like Hull and Middlesbrough as well. So there probably is a little bit of pressure for Norwich to win it. And if Norwich can win it, then that would extend their gap to Preston to 8 points with 3 games left for Norwich, 4 games for Preston. That would be near enough, and that would be enough in my view, I think, barring some sort of disaster for Norwich to make sure that they finish above Preston this season. So it would take one of the contenders out of the conversation. So yeah, that is the way that I view it. I think it's a must not lose for Norwich ahead of obviously 2 home games then that you would bounce into with a pretty healthy points cushion. But in terms of their control of that grip on the top 6, absolutely, it feels like a game that both teams really need to win. And that probably makes it, I don't know, I think whenever you think of games like that, you hope they're going to be entertaining and 2 heavyweight boxers almost sort of swinging punches at each other, but often they can be quite cagey and quite tight because the stakes are so high. So yeah, it's going to be some occasion, I think. And, rest assured, anyone of a Norwich persuasion going to Deepdale tomorrow, Preston are not going to lack for motivation. You only have to read and listen to what Ryan Lowe has said in the last few days and today as well at his press conference to underline that, really.
Yeah, Dan Mayhew agreeing that Preston have done a great job. If they get the summer right, they could be right up there next season. Harry saying hi, hope you're well. This afternoon, Harry, Connor, you're the GOAT, according to Tom.
That's Dereham Town's manager, who's also in playoff contention himself. So I'm keeping an eye on their results as well. So I hope Toast gets them across the line.
Yeah, of course, they played Norwich's youth side not many weeks ago. You sort of asked David Wagner around kind of the youth players that have been pushed to the bench in recent games due to needs must. You know, Norwich have got a thin squad, as David Wagner's kind of reiterated in recent weeks. What do you make of kind of the development for these players? I know we spoke about this quite heavily kind of after that FA Cup game at Anfield, where, you know, they sort of put a bench together featuring a lot of players that maybe didn't come on, but there was the youth team that were playing at Manchester United that weekend, and maybe it felt like the opportunity for those players to get on the bench wasn't there. How do you think this sort of, you know, helps their development? I suppose, you know, they're getting that match day kind of senior experience, but then they're not getting the minutes that maybe helps them develop for the future. So sort of how do you find that balance, you know, going forwards?
Yeah, and that's basically how I framed the question to David Wagner yesterday. You have pros and cons to this, absolutely, and the pros are, and you've just mapped them out there. They get exposure to being in a first team environment and training with a first team, and the experience and lessons, I guess, that you can take from that as a young player. But it is detrimental to their development because they aren't playing matches. And you take someone like Kenneth Bowe and Finley Welsh, they've only really played in that game against Reading, where they put out a pretty strong side and lost anyway. And that is, I don't really see any argument for it, that is detrimental to their development. And okay, with Kenneth Bowe, you've obviously got a player there who's out of contract in the summer, and at the moment, I've heard nothing otherwise to suggest that it still feels pretty unlikely that he will stay at the club. So maybe that's less of a pressing issue, but even so, I think you do run the risk, and you know, Adam Ida's a good example. We could list several others. Maybe even Liam Gibbs is an example. You run the risk of these players not being able to show themselves in the way that they would like, and ultimately, every time they step on a training pitch, every time they play a game, they are being judged, they are being assessed, they are being analysed as to whether they can get into the first team in the here and now, but also in the future as well. And equally, whilst they're away in the first team, you've got other players in the 21s who are staking the claim to try and do exactly the same thing. So it only takes someone to kick on in the under 21s for them to fall slightly down the pecking order, something like that. And as a career, it can maybe not a career, but definitely as a career at Norwich, it can evaporate pretty quickly. So there is always a balance to strike. And I know the criticism has been that if you give these players moments in it, or if these players are on the bench and they've got no prospect really of coming onto the pitch, then sort of what from my perspective, what is the harm of allowing them to play 60 minutes for the 21s or that kind of thing? But equally, they're there really just to make up the numbers, and that's a problem. That is a problem because, as I said, your one injury, your one moment, as probably the Liam Gibbs issue is exposed, from these players being required, and if they don't have the experience in matches, if they don't have the feel, if they don't have the I don't know, the mentality probably required to step into these games, then it can be really difficult. And of course, it's tough as well for coaches because you can't give free passes to players and young players just because you're under pressure from fan bases to do so, or you know, that particularly if they're not good enough and you don't feel they're good enough. So I can kind of sympathize with David and what he's saying, and I can understand that. But by the same token, there is obviously the long-term picture. And I think all of this feeds into maybe the narrative that has been running throughout this season, is that everything feels a little bit temporary, a little bit short-term. And it's difficult to argue with that when you see the situation is as it is. And, you know, I know he points to the January transfer window, but this is the hand he's been dealt. And ultimately, I think as a coach, you have to use the squad in whatever form you have to the best that you can. And that means giving these players some moments. And, you know, we spoke about Sidney van Hooijdonk earlier. There is an argument, whether it's true or not, but there is an argument that Kenneth Bowe is better suited to what David Wagner wants. So let's see him. Let's see if he can do it, particularly, you know, in the moments where you're 2-0 up away at Sheffield Wednesday. And I know obviously the way it panned out wasn't ideal, but if you can't bring on those players in those moments, maybe you don't bring them on at all. It's tough. It's really difficult. And I feel for everyone involved in this because there's no easy answer or easy solution. There's just pros and cons. And I think you have to weigh that up in whatever way you can. But it is difficult. It is difficult. And it's difficult for everyone. And I'm not quite sure, certainly in the next few weeks, how it gets resolved because, you know, we've painted the injury picture. It's not going to ease to such an extent that these players aren't going to be required in matchday squads. So, yeah, that's difficult. And there feels like there needs to be some compromise from someone somewhere in order for that situation to be eased a little bit.
Yeah, a few people kind of reiterating similar points in the comments. Lewis, I'm confused why Wagner complains about his squad depth, but then doesn't use his squad. Dan Mayhew, you've spoken about Liam Gibbs already, but that kind of shows the issue with the youth setup in a Wagner-led Norwich. It's the same with the Finn squad. He doesn't utilise the subs. Sidney van Hooijdonk comes to mind.
Can I? Yeah, I'll just jump in there because I think there has been obviously, and I did the interview on Tuesday night when David Wagner made the comments around the squad and the fitness of it. And for me, look, he might say to me I'm completely wrong and I've interpreted it the wrong way. But the way I feel like he's saying it's a quality issue, not a numbers issue, if that makes sense. So I think he's talking about a thinness in terms of options that he feels can impact championship games positively or meaningfully, rather than a lack of numbers, because clearly there's not a lack of numbers in the squad because they're pushing through young players. It's then a conversation about whether those young players and Sidney van Hooijdonk and others on the bench are capable of going into championship games and impacting them. And at the moment, it doesn't feel like he feels they can. And again, that's problematic because then essentially you've got a bench of 3 or 4 players for every game, and then your squad is thin. And that does lead to overload and it leads to the issues with Josh Sargent that we're seeing. So it is a complex issue, and it's obviously as well, feels like a little bit of an arm wrestle between him and Ben Napper as well at the moment. So all of that is playing out whilst Norwich City are trying to get into the playoffs, which again makes this, I think, very complex. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out in the next few weeks.
Yeah, we'll be live for another sort of 5 or so minutes. So any last comments, questions, score predictions, get them down below and we'll try and get round to those. Connor, of course, we had the Manager and Player of the Month awards announced this morning. David Wagner and Gabriel Zara were both up for the awards. David Wagner pipped by, I suppose, the old enemy, Kieran McKenna at Ipswich Town. Gabriel Zara, that was Mickey Johnston at West Brom that got that award. Do you think either of those were maybe robbed of potentially, picking up the accolade? I mean, David Wagner, 4 wins from 5 games in March. It was a really positive sort of run, lots of goals, the wins against Rotherham and Stoke. Disappointed maybe neither of them got the sort of response I suppose they'd have wanted.
Well, yeah, you get used to it, don't you? I think with the way Ipswich have been spoken about this season, as soon as I saw the shortlist, I thought that there would only be one winner, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, ultimately these awards are always about, even though they're directed towards managers, they're about teams, aren't they? And they're about runs that teams have been on. And so it's incredibly positive that Norwich are in a conversation where their head coach and their players are being pushed into those positions. So that's indicative of a good run of form ultimately. And so that's positive. If that means that Norwich go under the radar, excellent. And there's usually a curse around these things, isn't there? So maybe it's not the worst thing in the world for Ipswich to have that. Mikey Johnson, I have to say, I've watched him a few times for West Brom. He's a player that I know Norwich have shown interest in previously. Excellent footballer. I think we're seeing that. And at the moment, I'm watching him and wondering how on earth he hasn't got in. Having watched Celtic also, wondering how on earth he hasn't got in Celtic's team, because he's got real quality and real talent, and West Brom have done very well to prize him away on loan. And I think they've benefited from the quality that he's had in tight games as well, because he's capable of producing individual quality that can win games, as equally is Gabriel Zara. So yeah, it's indicative of a good run. I don't know. I'm not majorly upset about either one losing out. It's great if you win it. If you lose it, you kind of shrug your shoulders and keep pushing forward. It will matter to no one if Norwich City can get into the playoffs and obviously win them with a special day at Wembley, which is the aim now.
Yeah, a few late comments and questions. Dan Mayhew again. I play Football Manager with Finn squads, but it's great for it's about great youth recruitment. This is just shows how bad the recruitment has been, and agree there is a fight between Napper and Wagner. Freddie on Facebook, spot on. Connor, the players we got on the bench, Wagner feels they're not ready. Dan Mayhew feeling Gabriel Zara should have picked up the award, but Wagner didn't deserve it. I suppose it's come around to that point in the show now, Connor, score prediction time. It's kind of feels like it's going to be a very different game to that at Carrow Road. It was 2 sides that were, managers under pressure, 2 sides that were not in great form. I know Norwich had, picked up a couple of wins at that point, given kind of the Cardiff turnaround, but they weren't exactly free-flowing and great at Carrow Road like they are at the moment. Feels like it's all geared for a completely different game. Norwich, of course, won 4-0 at Deepdale last time out. Similar score tomorrow afternoon?
Oh, if only. That would be lovely, wouldn't it? I think it's going to be really tight. And as we've said, it's huge. It really is huge. If either side can win it, it's huge. I think there's an argument that draw maybe doesn't do a great deal for either. But again, that's dependent on other results and what the other results look like. Norwich have benefited from pretty fortunate results elsewhere in recent weeks. And, I posted the other day in terms of the maximum points that everyone can get. I'll try and find that so I can read it. But it puts Norwich in a pretty good position. Here it is now. So the maximum points available from the teams challenging. So I've ranged this between West Brom and Hull. So West Brom can get 84, Norwich can get 80, Coventry can get 78, Preston can get 78, Middlesbrough can get 74, and Hull can get 77. So you look even at that. If Norwich City lose the game tomorrow, they can get a maximum of 77. Preston can get a maximum of 78. It's going to be unlikely looking at Preston's fixtures that they're going to take maximum points. But as we said earlier, it's the psychology around it. Equally, if Norwich can win that, it means the maximum that Preston can get is 75. And that would put Norwich on 71, I think, from my maths, with obviously Southampton's come in the week. So that goes to show, I think, how big this stage of the season is. If Norwich can win tomorrow, I think there are a couple of wins from doing it with obviously 2 home games on the horizon as well. So, but you can't, I think, discount the away form and how difficult that's been throughout the season. Only 5 wins on the road, and we all saw what unfolded on Tuesday from a position really of complete dominance in that first half. And I agree with David Wagner actually that if they'd have taken their chances, there was 3 points there for them, and they didn't. And then we can have the debate about the substitutions if we want to, but I think you have to acknowledge as well the chances that Norwich City squandered in that game. So, what am I saying? I think this is going to be tight. I think Norwich are going to have to manage portions of it, particularly the first portion of the game. I think if they can do that, then I think there'll be opportunities for them on the counter. I think it will be 1-1, Adam. That's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah, I see a lot of people in the comments feeling similar. Peter on YouTube saying he would take a draw. Dan Mayhew, it's away from home, so it'll be a draw 1-1 or a loss 2-1. Which we would have been ahead. That's kind of been a bit of a familiar theme, I suppose. Joe feeling fairly confident from the looks of this. I think we'll beat Preston and beat Bristol City and find ourselves in a good position to finish in the top 6. That's all these big games coming up on the horizon. Yeah, I think I'm kind of in a similar sort of boat. I can see 2 sides that know that, a defeat could be quite damaging. Preston probably more so than Norwich, but, even Norwich know, the kind of permutations around a defeat, and if other sides around them have won, it's kind of got to that stage in the season where you're looking at other teams' results, hoping that they've gone in your favour. Yeah, I'm going to go for a draw as well, but a slightly more high-scoring Desmond 2-2 draw at Deepdale, which was not the worst thing, I suppose, for Norwich City, given all the sort of things you mapped out there. But of course, we're hoping for 3 points and hopefully less cold than it was at Hillsborough on Tuesday night. Not hoping to take quite so many layers. Quick comment here as well from Tom. Has Sarah basically not even been our best player in the previous month? I suppose Josh Sargent scored quite a few goals. Jack Stacey was very impressive, I felt, throughout March. So was anyone else maybe you felt that should have been in the frame, Connor?
Well, Sargent definitely. Now you say that, it's difficult to know how he hasn't been put in the conversation. I don't know how many goals he got in March. That's probably, and I see you eagerly going to look it up. Yeah. But that feels slightly harsh. Defenders never really sort of, and it's harsh, but they never really sort of get these accolades. That it tends to be attacking players or midfield players, because it's easy to kind of pick from goals and goal contributions and whatnot. But yeah, Jack Stacey's been, I think, really since he had a week off in about January, has been tremendous and consistent, and looked a lot like the Jack Stacey that we saw at the start of the season that a lot of people were excited about. So yeah, I mean, even Angus Gunn I'd throw into the conversation. Some of the saves that he's made in March, and again, made a big, I know that we could maybe debate the second goal and his role within that, but he made a really important save to deny Callum Patterson in that game. So yeah, Kenny McLean, of course, if you're looking for pure consistency, I think he has been nominated in previous iterations and previous months of the award. So yeah, I think there's plenty that you can put in the conversation, but compared to some of the conversations we were having in November, this is a nice one to have, I guess, that only one Norwich player has been nominated rather than 5 or 6.
Yeah, 4 goals for Josh Sargent in March. Of course, the really big goal against Sunderland that picked up all 3 points. The goal against Rotherham, 1 at Stoke, and then the goal against Plymouth, of course, for the 2-1 victory on Good Friday. Yes, hopefully, maybe Norwich have got a few more players in the conversation for April, and that might mean that they're in a pretty good place in the top 6 by the time we reach the final day. I think with that, we're going to round off and soon make the long trip up north. Hopefully, the weather's left grim and there's no traffic hold-ups like we had the other day. So, yeah, fingers crossed for a smooth journey. Anyone making the long trip to Deepdale, safe travels. It's obviously a long old poke up there. Bring the noise and hopefully you're rewarded for your loyalty, making such a long journey. With that, lots of great content as well across the Pink 'Un channels at the moment. On YouTube, you've got Terrace Talk. I spoke to Tom from the Preston End. So you got all the lowdown there on the opposition. Of course, Sam spoke to Grant Hanley yesterday, so that's well worth a listen. Sort of his hopes for Euro 2024, his return from fitness, so that's well worth a watch. David Wagner's full press conference up, of course, as well. And Sam's tactics board has gone up this morning as well. So there's lots of content to get your teeth stuck into on this Friday afternoon. Dan, safe journey, lads, and Tom, great stuff, lads. If NCFC fans can't travel, of course, head down to Dereham. Of course, we would advocate local football on a Saturday afternoon if you're not making the trip to Preston. So yeah, Dereham, of course, is
you might see Grant Holt if you go there. To be fair.
There we go. It's his birthday today, so happy birthday, Grant, if you're watching. Let's hope for 3 points for Norwich and 3 points for Dereham tomorrow afternoon. With that, we're going to sign off. Pink 'Un Plus app as well, of course. $2.99 a month, free trial as well, so that's well worth checking out if you haven't already. We're going to sign off. We'll see you at Deepdale tomorrow. Interesting team news, I suppose, depending on if a certain Josh Sargent is available.